Rise of Hawk, Part 5, Scene 1. About a week after leaving Kamo, back in Aram City. Lalan was still getting used to the low ceilings of Iranian buildings. Even sitting on the carpeted floor, she still felt pressure from above. In fact, boxed in from all sides. Everything was too small for her. Vehicles, clothes, utensils, bathrooms, even the blankets and cots on which she slept. She wouldn't ever complain out loud, but she didn't feel particularly comfortable anywhere at the moment, and it was getting on her nerves. Only those who had been there in RoH were in the meeting. Nama and Talon sat against the wall to her left. Nalana, the healer girl, sat by the door. Bana lay in the corner on a cot because he wasn't able to walk around yet, and sitting next to him was Zach, still with burns on his face and arm in a sling. Sitting across from her, against the opposite wall, was Asha, and a man Lalan didn't know. Supposedly this man was the great rebel leader Hawk. He commanded a lot of respect from the others. But Lalan didn't know the blue-eyed twerp from a bar of soap. She didn't care if he was the founder himself. After Mena, she wasn't going to give anyone respect without their first earning it. "Look," she said as she lifted her legs up under her. A shaft of pain shot through her stomach and she grunted. "I can refine it as much as possible, but this explosion is still going to be too big for what you want. Mena humped us. He humped us hard." Hawk frowned at her. "Is there any way we could make the right explosive from scratch?" She leaned her head back on the wall and sighed. "I could make the triggering device out of a car radio, no trouble. But the explosive chemical you want is too hard to make on the fly, even if we had a lab and a bunch of technicians. But given a few months, I might be able to find a supplier here at Arana that we don't have time." The man's voice was quiet, even though he interrupted her. Asha, sitting across the room from Lalan, looked sideways at him. "Why not? If we do this now, with these explosives, hundreds of innocent people will die." Hawk got to his feet, pacing away from them towards a window covered with greying towels. He sighed. "It's Heth Pelham." He glanced over his shoulder at them all for a moment. "He's the agent in charge of finding Hawk. He's very close to finding proof I'm involved. When he finds it, there won't be anywhere for the rebels. The rebels can hide. It has to be done very soon or it'll be too late for everyone." "The other rebels aren't going to like this development." Nalana spoke up from the door. Still with his back to them, Hawk sighed again. "We can't tell them." Sitting next to Lalan, Nama grunted. "Of course we can't. They'll mutiny on us." "I'm tempted to mutiny myself," added Talon on the other side of Nama. "There has to be another way of doing this. We can't." "It must be done, so it will be done." Hawk turned around to face them. Lalan sensed a flicker of danger in the man's deliberate movements, and she instinctively tensed up. "The loss of lives is regrettable, but it's going to happen regardless." His voice was too calm, and Lalan wondered what was underneath all that ice, whether he was mad and egotistical like Mena, or if something else was responsible for his uncompromising manner. "Lalan, will you refine it as much as possible for us, please?" She nodded. "I'll do my best, but I'm going to need some gear in a cool, dry environment." The man nodded slowly. "Compile a list and give it to Asha. I'll supply everything you require. But I need to know, once it is refined as much as possible, how much damage will it do?" She folded her arms across her chest and thought for a moment. "Well, anyone in the immediate levels around the explosion will be vapor. No doubt about that. If we shut off the gas beforehand, you'll have less damage. If your tower is steel reinforced like it should be, and the explosion isn't anywhere near the load-bearing foundations, the building will probably stay upright. So those people above and below will be all right if they can get away from the fire." She sighed. "Essentially, it's not going to be pretty, even after I refine it." "Toka to." The girl healer stood up, She covered her mouth with one hand and went towards the door. "I need some air." Hawk sighed. "Give me a moment." He walked through the small group of rebels to the door and followed her outside. There was silence for a long while. Lalan waited for the spell to lift, but it didn't. She smirked across the room at Asha. So, what, those two grapple in bed or something? Asha snorted, and Alan's gambit to ease the tension paid off as most of the rest of the room laughed at her as well. So that's a no then? Talon grinned at her, and she felt her heart flitter. That's definitely a no. Nala's in an exclusive relationship, and Hawk's a priest. A priest? Lalan's snort degraded into a cackling laugh. Soth and Nooth. No wonder he's so uptight. He needs a roll in the sack to loosen those butt cheeks. The door opened, and she shut her mouth, even as the others continued to laugh. Hawk looked around the room and lifted an eyebrow at Asha. What's going on? Don't worry, just a joke at your expense. Asha answered with a grin and then cleared her throat. So, what's next? How do we minimize the collateral damage? He glanced around for a moment with an uncertain frown on his face, but shrugged and paced to the other end of the room. Misdirection, he said as he sat down. They were all quiet again. Lalan tipped her head on the side and frowned at the younger man. What, you mean deliberately lure folks out of the tower? Yes. The man's coldness lifted into a mischievous half-smile, and Lalan saw some of the man underneath. Not so uptight after all, she thought as she mimicked his half-smile. Tourists can help, blurted Asha. Yes, said Bana from where he lay. If some high-profile rebels go to a large public place with cameras, we could get a lot of attention from the tower. Sitting next to Bana, young Zack shuffled forwards. With Liz and the others, we could... No, Zack. Hawk's voice was gently correcting. You and your friends have had enough risk. I'd like you guys to help by shutting off the gas at the tower. No combat. Lalan? Blue eyes lifted to stare at her. How long will it take to refine the stuff? She shrugged. I don't know, a few weeks, a month at most. Just obtaining and setting up the gear will take some time. Okay. Asha, I need you to continue planning ways of getting people out of levels 8 through 12 of the tower and organise supplies for Lalan. See if the old Ronin embassy building is adequate. He got to his feet and smiled down at Lalan. You should at least be comfortable. Asha frowned. So what are you going to do? I've got to stall Heth. She smirked. Good luck. Scene 2, the next day. Talon sat on soft cream carpet. Autumn sunlight poured through the windows onto his back. He should be enjoying the warmth and light, but he couldn't stop his raging thoughts. He sighed, took another mouthful of Nama's homemade beer, and put the bottle back down on the carpet between them. Do you think he could be mad? Nama grabbed a bottle and took a swig of his own. Who? Hawk? Yeah, he nodded. I mean, I know Asha jokes about it all the time, but what if he is actually mentally unstable? Nama shrugged. If he is, he's a good pretender. Why? We're helping him kill... He sighed. You know, there are hundreds of innocent people. He trailed off again, struggling to get his head around it all. Yeah, grunted Nama. On the outside, Nama didn't seem to care. His yellow eyes stared off into space. His face was clear of any emotion, but Talon sensed a shaft of confused grief in his old friend. He glanced sideways. How do we make it right? Make what right? Someone walked into the room, and Tay looked up into Nalana's heart-shaped face. She sat down on the carpet next to them and added another 2 bottles of homemade beer to the space between the 3 of them. He shrugged with one shoulder. This bombing thing. Don't you dare, she said, suddenly angry. Both he and Nama stared at her, surprised at the vehemence in her voice. He frowned. What do you mean? Don't you dare make this right. We're helping to kill innocent people, and that's not right. Not by any measurement. If you make it right in your mind, in your head, you're no better than the Rona Ban. Talon sat back and stared at her. But it's not right, she interrupted. Her voice softened, and Talon sensed a pulse of sadness. But it is necessary. That's how you can accept that it's going to happen. It's not right, but it's necessary. She sighed and grabbed one of the bottles she'd brought with her, taking a long swig of its contents before putting it back down on the carpet. "Necessary," said Nama quietly. "Okay, I think I can handle that." Talon lifted the bottle to his mouth. He wasn't sure if it was enough for him, but he guessed it was the best he could do, considering their situation. What could he do exactly? Take back what happened in Rona? Perhaps try to stop Dobit from doing this? Neither of those options were possible. He just simply had to figure out how to make peace with it and get on with doing what he had to survive. The three of them sat, drinking Nama's bitter homemade beer in solemn silence. The fight against the agency wasn't what he thought it would be. It wasn't a heroic battle for freedom. There were more rebels than there had been before, and they'd certainly won a great deal more victories against the agency under Hawk. But it wasn't a joyous victory for the right side, as he'd hoped. Talon hadn't even wanted to fight in the first place, but had done so to protect what was left of his family. Oddly enough, he trusted Dobit, despite all of the hidden agendas and deceptions. He knew with every fibre of his being that Dobit was doing what he believed was right. But, like his sister, Talon often wondered if there were better ways to do things, certainly without needing to kill innocent people. Nama cleared his throat, bringing everyone's attention back to their little second-floor sunroom. "So, Tay, you going to help out with the evac? Help out or evac with the others?" "I'm staying." "More?" "Yeah, why not? Sounds like fun." Nalana took a long gulp of beer. "What's the mall?" "Star Mall," said Nama between mouthfuls. "Tourists and I will go in and play tag with the cameras to get people's attention. RoH will hack into all their security systems and play havoc like we're after something important, all with the hope that they'll send an army of agents over from the tower to stop us. Just before it goes down, we'll evac out of there." "Yeah, it's basically doing a bunch of pranks," Talon winked at Nalana. "So it should be lots of fun." She laughed. "That does sound like fun." "So," Talon smiled sideways at her, "when are you going to evacuate, Nala?" The smile on her face lowered into a determined scowl. "When I'm good and ready." She took the fullest bottle of beer from the floor and got to her feet. "Hey, I was just—" She left the room, slamming the door closed behind her. Talon sighed and took another gulp of beer. A moment later, Nama did the same. Scene 3, 17th of Arakan, 3010. 2.5 weeks later. Sharon's office was too much like an altar to his own genius for Dobit's liking. Awards and commendations, every promotion certificate his father had ever earned, even the potted plant he'd been given as a wedding present, were all on display. The self-worship cluttered the walls and every available surface. To Dobit it all seemed uncomfortably garish. He would have already made several disparaging remarks about his father's lack of public humility that morning, but he just didn't have the energy to devote to their customary insult sparring, as well as arguing with him. "He is my son. I will go and claim him." Dobit crossed his arms over his chest and glared. From behind his desk, Sharon snorted. "No, you're needed here. Heth is using every opportunity he can to discredit you." "Heth is a petty little man grasping at straws," Dobit growled. "I will not dignify his harassment by allowing him to stop me doing my job. I'm going to get my son in the new A1 intakes, and if he has a problem with me doing my job, he can sit on it and spin." He turned away from his father and stalked towards the door, stopping to growl over his shoulder. "If you're so worried about Heth, why don't you deal with him? I have better things to do with my time than letting his little wraith hunt rattle me." Dobit slammed the door behind him and kept up his act of an enraged person down the length of the level 10 hallway to the elevator. People saw him coming and hurriedly stepped into side rooms or turned completely around to avoid him. No one wanted contact with an angry Enigma. Despite the outer hostility of Enigma, underneath that, Dobit wanted to skip down the hall. He wanted to crow from the top of his lungs and grin like he'd won the lottery. He'd finally managed to get all of the kids from his primary players list at the desert training base and Wolf onto the next intake list. He could now legitimately go and get his son from the desert and do his job as Hawk by protecting the other children. As he moved into the elevator, those who had been waiting in front of it stepped back out of his way. He turned around, glared at the 5 terrified faces standing in the hall, and pressed the button. The door closed, and he was alone in the elevator with a security camera. The edges of his mouth twitched up. "Not long, son. I'm coming." Scene break, about lunchtime, west of Epa, deep in the Great Desert. Dobed's stomach tightened as the helicopter approached a squat off-yellow building. The Azero facility was constructed in an ugly box shape, with an open-air exercise yard hugging the north wall. His jaw tightened. Despite all of the good that had come out of his experiences there, he still hated the place. Like many other desert facilities, the helicopter pad for incoming traffic was located on the roof above the control room. As they hovered down towards the landing pad, Dobed looked through the glass at his feet and saw the head of the facility waiting for him. Agent Bree's square face was pulled into a cruel glower. It's the same expression as the last time Dobed saw the man, which was 13 years ago, almost to the day, on his own agency-sanctioned escape from Nuthen. When the helicopter was on solid ground, Dobed pulled open the door. Upon seeing him, Agent Bree's eyes widened and his mouth opened. Observing Bree's genuine fear caused a malicious spark of glee to shoot through the core of Dobed, but he kept his face emotionless. He approached the man who had repeatedly broken his bones and bullied him mercilessly. Bree was older, skin spotty from sun damage, and wisps of white hair orbited an otherwise bald head, but he was the same as he remembered him. "Agent Bree, how nice to see you," he said in a hostile but polite tone. The man swallowed and took out his outstretched hand. "Hello, sir." Dobed lifted his chin. "I've come to take the next A1 intake back to Aram. I have the list. ETA for the transport helicopter is approximately 20 minutes. He paused, waiting for Bree to invite him inside. The man seemed afraid, so much so he probably wasn't thinking straight. The corner of Dobed's mouth lifted mockingly. "May we proceed?" "Oh, yes, please come in. They're having lunch at the moment. Standard lockdown procedure?" Bree indicated the stairwell door and his outstretched arm shook. "Yes." Dobed strode past him. "If you give me the access card, I'll go down there myself." "Of course. Do you need escort, sir?" He looked back over his shoulder at the older man. "Just direct me to the stairwell. I know the way from there, Bree." The man simpered. "Of course, sir." Scene break. Tobin stood in the doorway, staring at the noise and bustle of children eating lunch. No one had sensed him yet, so they were in their natural state of misbehaviour. Half of the long room was filled with grubby wooden picnic tables. The other half was taken up by the food line and kitchen. One corner of his mouth lifted slightly, and he reached to touch the doorframe. His fingertips found a mark, the ancient letter, Dena, carved into the wood. It was his tiny rebellion against a system that had tried to suffocate him. Sitting on either side of his symbol were the ancient letters Shan for Asher and Reda for Orion. It had been their little pact to stay friends forever and not let the world crush them. He sighed, swallowed back the memories, and dropped his hand again. He had more important things to focus on than the past. Wolf sat across the room with his back to Dobed, eating. The boy had made friends with almost all of the children on his primary players list. This was good, mostly because they'd helped to protect him, but also it made acquiring the children much easier. The 6 of them sat at the same table, talking and laughing animatedly. His eyes hovered over each child for a moment and eventually returned to Wolf's back. He brushed the surface of his son's mind with gentle fingertips, and the boy instantly turned around. Wolf's oval face tightened and he suppressed his reaction, but his silver eyes gleamed at him. His son was all right. He'd been protected, and now the boy would be safe at the tower until the bombing. Taking a deep breath, Dobed dropped all of his emotions again and became the professional agent that was required to complete the job. Scene 4. That evening. Aram City Church of the Founder. Dobed sat on the edge of the cathedral bell tower, one shoe hanging a metre or so over the black roof shingles, his other foot resting on the ancient stone of the bell tower. He stared out at the flickering lights of the city and the bright orange double full moons low in the sky. Such a celestial event as a double full moon, as well as its harvest orange hue, only happened once in a lifetime. Put a broad hand on the head of the stone gargoyle next to him. It sat inside the tower and stared out at the city as it had for 1,000 years. The real gargoyle creatures still existed elsewhere in the world, but there were none left in Arana since the Reformation massacre. The modern church called them wraiths. David preferred the more neutral word of gargoyle. Nalana called them moon, but she also called whales moon, just to confuse matters. David felt a kinship with the original tribe of gargoyles that used to live on the cathedral roof. They were not soulless creatures of the darkness and destruction like the modern church taught. They were intelligent and loving, more so than most Armanan. So few people knew the truth about the real gargoyles, just as so few knew the truth about Hawk. One corner of his mouth lifted in amusement. Of course, the main difference between him and the gargoyles was that his mask of lies and deception was mostly of his own making. He sighed, stroking his hand gently over the nose and neck of the old carving. Tomorrow was the 18th of Arakan, the day of the bombing. Tomorrow he would die simply because there was no one else who could get the explosives into the A0 chambers. The original plan involved an amount small enough to hide unseen under the table. Unfortunately, there was too much explosive material to follow that plan. Someone would have to carry it in and then set it off manually. So he would see the look of betrayal on his father's face before he died after all. To his far left, the trapdoor under the ancient brass bell opened. Nalana's heart-shaped face looked tense and a little frightened. She still hadn't lost that touch of fear of him, a thing which, if he was honest with himself, pained him every time he saw it in her eyes. No matter what he said or done, no matter what he had done or said since, he could not erase her memory of him capturing her all of those years ago. He glanced away from that fear. "I figured you'd be up here," she said. One corner of his mouth lifted. "Big day tomorrow." "I guess so," she sighed. "Are you going to do what I think you're going to do?" He brushed her mind with a telepathic hand and looked sideways at her. "Yes." "Why?" "It has to be done by someone. Why not me?" "Why not someone else?" She sat down on the stone ridge in front of him and folded one leg under her. He shook his head. "I cannot ask this of anyone else, Nalana. Besides, who would you recommend? Talon, Asha, Nama? Who deserves to die?" "No." Her voice was firm. "No, Dober, don't do that. Don't redirect this. There's always another way. You of all people know that to be true. There has to be someone else who can do it. We need you alive, and so does your son." At the mention of Wolf becoming an orphan, a shaft of despair came into his heart. It rose so quickly that a tear dropped from one eye before he managed to suppress it. He swallowed and wiped his face with one hand. "There is more at stake here than Wolf and I." His voice wavered. "Yes, there is, but the whole world, Armanan and Moon, need you for the next thing that's coming." He frowned at her. Did she know? She continued, "I know there is someone else who can do it for you. If you just stop being stubborn and look into the future to see who it is." He faked an amused smile. "And how do you know with such certainty, O wise one?" She glowered at his sarcasm. "Ha ha. No, my Nan said you would save us all, and not from the agency. This thing tomorrow can't be your last act as Hawk, so there must be another way." His mouth opened. "You're just being pig-headed and deciding to fall on your sword." The stubborn pout lifted into her lips. "I don't know why you have trouble valuing your own life, but I won't let you throw it away without looking for another solution. If it's the only solution, then I'll leave it be. But I'll never forgive you if you die and you could have saved yourself. And," she crossed her arms over her chest, "I'm not leaving you alone until you look, even if I have to stay here all night." He chuckled. All right, I'll look. But you have to promise that you'll leave the city on the next evac truck in the morning. Deal? She nodded. Deal. He took a deep breath, releasing all the tension in his body. Closing his eyes, he asked the wordless question that Nalana wanted. Static shivered over the front surface of his body, bringing goosebumps to the back of his neck and an odd vibration up his spine. When the vision lifted away from him again, he sighed and opened his eyes. Nalana, he made his voice very gentle, the one who can replace me is an innocent. So is your son. He sighed. I'll think about it. Lifted one eyebrow at her. Look at you, the champion of the innocent, insisting I sacrifice one in order to save my own skin. She snorted. It's not just your skin I want to save, it's my own and everyone else's. What do you mean? You know what you're really stopping, David. This isn't just about the agency. There's something bigger coming, and that's what you're really stopping. One side of his mouth lifted. Exactly how much do you know, Nalana? Her mouth tightened, and he sensed that she was sad. I know my own part in it, and I know that you need to survive beyond this despicable bombing. If only you'll just save yourself. She sighed, and the tension in her shoulders dropped. Now, will you come downstairs and have a hot drink with Father Andrew? He misses you. David smirked. Yes, Mother.